Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Yes, and for those of you listening live on WVBR on Saturday night, this is a little bit of a late start, and I'll apologize for that. In a moment, I'm going to have Adam Sayne live here in studio with me. He's currently parking his car. We went to Albatwitch Fest today, and Adam has come up. Adam is the host of the very excellent Conspiranormal podcast, and he's been on roundtables and stuff with us before. He's based down in Tennessee. He made a trip around the East Coast and made sure to come up here on a Saturday night so we could do this. We were originally going to have Peter Robbins with us as well, but time restraints didn't quite work out like we planned. It took us a little longer to get back from southern Pennsylvania than we initially thought it was going to. And, yeah. So, first of all, I want to thank everyone who came up to me at Albatwitch Fest and said hello. It was great meeting everybody. It was an interesting place. Unfortunately, we were late getting there too, because that's kind of a theme, really. Late, yeah. We got there a little later than we wanted to, and we did get to see Stone Breath. For those of you in the Where Did the Road Go Facebook group, you got to see some of the footage from that as I was streaming it live, as well as us going to hunt for Timothy Renner when we got there. It's a pretty nice place down there in Columbia. And there were a bunch of vendors, some really interesting people to talk to. We didn't get to see any of the talks. Tim's talk was before we got there. And the Crypto Kid was talking, but we were watching Stone Breath. And by the time all that was done, he had left. We were hoping to get an interview with him. We do have some interesting stuff that's going to go up on the Facebook page and on the, probably on the YouTube, because it's all in video. All right. So we did this Albatwitch Fest thing. It was really interesting. They're going to be doing it again next year. And if you're in southern Pennsylvania area or within driving distance, it's probably worth coming to check out. There were two other bands that played. One was a horror punk band that everyone told me was really good, and the other one was a cover band. And as I said, we got Stone Breath, and we taped all the Stone Breath too. Timothy hadn't played in a year. Timothy Renner, for anyone who is missing it, is the host of Strange Familiars, which we distribute on the Where Did the Road Go channel as well. And in the Historical Museum, we talked a little bit about the ghost haunting it, and did just maybe a 20-minute conversation with everyone that I will be posting to YouTube. Yes. So, all right. We're going to be talking tonight about some recent events. Things like the Tom DeLong announcement. We're going to address. A lot of people have emailed me about that. We had done a show a while back with Greg Bishop talking about whether Tom was basically being Benewitzed or not. And now he's come out with this announcement, and we're gonna discuss a little of that. We're going to talk a little bit. We're probably going to talk a little bit about this announcement that the construction of the pyramids has been solved. I don't really think that's the case. So we're going to get to that as well. And there was one other thing I definitely wanted to touch on tonight. Oh, the blue avians. Yes, we're going to get into the blue avians. It's a favorite subject of Adam's. Adam loves the blue avians. So if you're not familiar with the blue avians, it goes into a whole mess. And MUFON is pretty connected to this. Where it's believed that this guy and Corey something, and I'm forgetting his name, Adam would know. I didn't follow it until somewhat recently. I hadn't even heard of this. Somehow I managed to block all of this out. But he was a time traveler, and he was taken when he was 16, and he fought in some secret space battle and then was put back into his body, and there are blue avians on the moon that apparently look like blue big birds. Not on the moon, I'm sorry, on Mars. And for some reason, this has actually taken hold. Now, there are people who deal with the secret space program, people like Rich Dolan, who have dealt with the whole secret space program thing and the possibility of that. And when I look at it, I would say, if the government has technology that is years ahead of ours, decades ahead of ours in the sense of what we see out there as our technology, it's entirely possible that they are in space. I would think it was likely that they are able to get into space. We wouldn't necessarily know about it, and they could be doing anything they want. But some of the stuff that comes out of these people is very, very puzzling. And it's hard to tell whether they even believe it or if they're a form of disinformation. Because it's so ridiculous at times that when you look at it, it's almost to kind of marginalize the whole idea. So it's one thing to think we could have a secret space program, and that secret space program could simply be explained by black ops technology that's way ahead of what we understand. That's simple. That's within the realm of reasonable speculation. When you take that and say, and come up with all these time travel things and all this other stuff, anyone looking at that from the outside is just immediately going to throw that out. They're going to be like, that's ridiculous. Why would anyone believe this stuff? And it gets thrown, it's baby out with the bathwater. It gets thrown out along with the genuine potential of there being a secret space program. One of the fictional podcasts I've been listening to, and I've recommended it numerous times here on the show, is Wolf 359. And part of their basis is that there's a secret space program. It's run by a corporation, and they've, I didn't realize, you don't realize it when you start listening to it, but as it's going, you're sort of saying, well, when is this taking place? And then they start filling in the backstory, and you realize it's happening now. And they have a space station out by Wolf 359 that's being manned, and that's where the story takes place. But it's not that far out of the realm of possibility. I mean, they may not have a space station that far out, but I mean, who knows what kind of tech they're dealing with? And it's one of those things where you just don't know. It's not like they have any reason to tell us or even give us any hints of what they may have behind the scenes. So, yeah, when you start dealing with some of this stuff, though, it really seems like it's there to marginalize the subjects, to kind of make fun of the subjects, and to prevent anyone from taking it completely seriously. All right. And we are joined by Mr. Adam Sayne.
That's right.
So you had a little bit of a issue parking.
Yeah, you'd think in a town, well, it's definitely smaller than where I come from, but you'd think that you wouldn't have too much of a problem parking here, but I suppose
it's not a lot of space and there's a lot of people.
That's kind of how it is, yeah.
And we're on the edge of College Town, so, it's like the last road or so of College Town going down the hill.
Yeah, well, Nate over there was telling me this is the last day of summer, or what is left of summer, so everybody's partying it up, apparently.
Yeah, it's still going to be warm next week.
Yeah, that's true.
So, anyway.
So you get into November when it's really going to be cold.
Maybe not. I don't know. It's been pretty warm lately, last couple of years. There's been just cold snaps here and there.
Yep.
But anyway, what did you think? I already told my thoughts on Albatwitch Fest or Albatwitch Fest. What did you think?
I thought it was interesting. It was good to see Stone Breath playing, for sure.
Yes.
That was
we missed the Crypto Kid.
We did miss the Crypto Kid, man. Apparently he just didn't stick around very long.
So if anyone is not aware who the Crypto Kid is, he was on Strange Familiars this last episode, and he's 16?
Yeah, I think so.
And he has like this encyclopedic knowledge of cryptozoology.
Yep.
And literally they said his like dad and sister took him home.
Really?
Yeah,
because he's not old enough to drive.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what it is?
But apparently he did a pretty long presentation there.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen his presentation.
Well, it was happening while Stone Breath were playing, and we were watching Stone Breath. Yeah.
I think we probably got there right as his presentation was beginning anyway, right? So I think we might have already missed most of it. That was a long drive, man.
It was a little over 4 hours.
Yeah.
From here.
So we drove 4 hours to get there, 4 hours back, and we were there for what?
3.5
hours?
Yeah, something like that. So we could make this, which we didn't make.
Yeah, well, it happens sometimes.
I was talking a little bit about the secret space program and the whole blue avian thing, and I think you know this better than I. It's Corey what? What's his name?
Corey Goode.
Corey Goode. Okay. And what's his story?
Well, as far as I know or understand, he says that he's a Martian super soldier.
Yeah.
Say that a few times fast. So he makes this claim, apparently. I don't know much about it, to be honest, Seriah. It's kind of hard to pay attention to.
He was like pulled out of his body and turned into a super soldier. And then
he was
put back in his body using time travel to when he was 16.
Right.
And has grown up with all this knowledge.
Yeah, he disappeared when he was 16. He comes back. He goes through his career as a Martian secret space soldier, and he ends up back in his body through the magic of time travel at the age of 16. So there's absolutely no way that anybody can prove any of this stuff, right?
And what I was saying is that it almost seems like it's a attempt to ridicule any real view of the secret space program, because
well, that's what Walter Bosley's saying.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's like if there could be black projects that are decades ahead of what we have, that we're aware of. So if they want to keep that, keep anyone from seriously investigating that, you throw nonsense like this out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You throw noise out there and people just laugh it off. Oh yeah, okay, secret space, yeah, big bird on Mars.
Well, what were we talking about before when we were coming back from Albatwitch, whatever the name is. What were we talking about when we came back? I was talking about some of the conspiracy theories that we've talked about on my show, and I was talking about somehow like disinformation gets out there.
Yeah.
And I was talking about something like Sandy Hook, which I know is like a kind of a sensitive subject for a lot of people.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of weird stuff about Sandy Hook, but I do think that the kids actually died.
Right.
There.
Yes, it was
the teachers actually
tragedy,
died
and
there.
people were killed.
But then you have these other people that say, well, this was all fake. It was a staged event. Well, how much of that stuff that we see on YouTube or whatever is disinformation?
Because if there is anything questionable going on, they don't want the focus to be on that. And that's the same with any of these conspiracy theories. I mean, some of them are organic, definitely. And there's obvious things. I mean, when 9/11 happened, there were very obvious things that stood out to me, where I say, well, that didn't make sense. Like, why weren't these planes shot down? Why did the buildings fall like that? None of this seems to make sense to what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And this was pre, anyone throwing out any conspiracy theory. I wasn't even thinking in conspiracy terms. I just didn't understand why things were unfolding the way they were.
Well, it's real questions. I mean, people that have real questions about what happened. But then, as you pointed out in the car as well, the people that say, well, the planes were just holograms and all this kind of nonsense. And which, there are people that really stake their reputation on that and say that that's true.
And I think there are people who fully believe it. But where did it start? Like, did it start with someone who fully believed it, or was that injected as disinfo and then picked up? Yeah,
it just makes it muddies the waters.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It muddies the waters and makes people think that nothing is that they think that people are just crazy. So these people are just crazy. Well, meanwhile, the people that aren't asking real questions are just going to think, well, it's a bunch of crazy nuts.
Yes.
And meanwhile, it just keeps the real questions from being real.
The people who are on a more grounded level, asking rational questions and saying this doesn't make sense to us, are being just tagged with conspiracy theory. You probably think the planes were holograms. We're not going to listen to you, and problem solved.
Back to the Corey Goode stuff. It's interesting because we were talking about this on one of the roundtables that we did, and I actually interviewed a person on my show, it's paranormal, by the way, that had exactly the same shtick, I suppose you could say, as Corey Goode. And this guy's name was Captain K. I don't really know exactly what happened to Captain K. He kind of disappeared. I haven't heard anything from him. This was a couple years ago that more than a couple years ago that we actually interviewed the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the exact same thing. He said, well, I was a Martian super soldier. I was protecting the Martian colonies on Mars. I was age regressed and sent back in time. The exact same thing.
So either these things are really happening, which is unlikely, or it's one of these things we're going to see again in another 10 years. Someone else is going to come forth with the same story.
Right. Well, I had to wonder with this guy, Captain K, that I spoke to, I had to wonder whether there could have been more to it, because I think three choices here. A, they're just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
B, they're making it up.
Right.
And C, it could have been that somebody actually did something to them that made them believe that this happened.
That's true.
And
I mean,
they are...
We could be fair and say four is it really happened. I think that's the least likely.
Sure. Well, are you saying you don't believe in the blue avians?
I don't.
Seriah?
Now, was he supposed to be fighting the blue avians?
I think in Corey Goode's, no, I mean, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Corey Goode's story that he was talking about the blue avians as being like these helpful
okay.
aliens.
Yeah. Helpful big birds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He was probably fighting the reptilians or something evil like that, right?
Well, of course. What was I thinking? The reptilians.
The reptoids.
And I mentioned we're going to be talking a little bit about Tom DeLonge's announcement. Do you remember the name of his thing?
It's To the Stars Media, right?
Is that it?
Isn't that what it's called? Well, that's his press company. I know that. That has put out all the books and the T-shirts and the hats and I don't know. Do they have koozies? They probably have those too.
I almost feel like my opinion when we had Tom DeLonge on before. We didn't have Tom. When we talked about Tom DeLonge before with Greg Bishop and stuff, my opinion was he was being bewitched. He was being used. But now I'm wondering if he's using this himself. It is not on his Wikipedia page.
Well, it seems to me that he. Well, I'll put it this way: he's got all these different guys that are with him, and again, I don't know any names or specific guys, but I know that some of them are CIA or ex-CIA, and that tends to ring a bell to me. Well, isn't he charging like $200 minimum?
You have to invest. So
into this thing. From
what I understand, the company is supposed to work on cutting edge technology, and here's I think the part that really stood out to me: and entertainment.
Yeah.
So it has all these ex-CIA, ex-government officials and stuff, including one who said, and this is what everyone got all excited about, he said that he was involved with a group in the government that paid, that was basically, following UFO sightings. And so people were like, oh my God, look, he was involved in UFO research in the government. And it's like, you didn't think the government checked this stuff out? I mean, officially they don't. But I have no doubt there is a group in the government that watches this stuff and is trying to figure out how they can utilize it.
Yeah.
I think when Project Blue Book said that it was not a threat to national security, that was probably true. But it doesn't mean it can't be used. And we know it's been used with UFO groups and stuff. I mean, Vallée wrote his whole book, Messengers of Deception, on how the intelligence community uses UFO groups and stuff. And Greg Bishop's book, his Project Beta book, talks about the same thing. How they're using all this different, using people in these groups to move disinformation and to do this and to do that. Obviously, they're paying attention to this stuff.
Yeah. Well, what is the appeal of using Tom DeLonge specifically?
That's a good question. Maybe he was just asking a lot of questions. He has the visibility. He's, he's a pop star.
Does he appeal to the young, possibly?
That That is very possible as well.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a big.
I know.
Big Blink 182 were a big band.
Right. Yeah, and they still are.
Well, they're not a band anymore.
That they have. Well, did they break up?
Yeah, because now he's doing Angels and Airwaves.
Well, I thought that they were still going on, but there was another.
Oh, is
they
there?
got another guitarist.
That could be.
That's what I think. He's just not in the band anymore.
Ah, okay. I did not know that.
But yeah, there's a lot of people. It's funny because when I went out to Roswell, and a friend of mine was supposed to go with me, this friend didn't end up going. I made the joke that he was going to bring his daughter along, and she's about 19, 20, and she kind of grew up listening to Blink 182, which I guess kind of heard as like classic rock.
Yeah, fair enough.
If you really think about it.
Yeah, because they were big in the 90s, and that's a good 20 years ago.
Late 90s into the early 2000s, and I teased her, and I said, well, if I see Tom DeLong, I'll let you know. And she said, yeah, you should get Tom DeLong on our show. We really love Tom DeLong. And a couple other people that were, 20 to 25 years younger than me said the same thing. So I think there's definitely an appeal there to getting the young or like a next generation interested in UFOs. It's just, is it going to be
he also doesn't
positive or negative?
He doesn't come across as crazy either.
No, he doesn't.
He's not someone who's just out there and you look at him and go, wow, this guy's nuts. And the name of the group they announced last week was To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science.
Yeah, I pulled that up too. Yeah.
And I'll read the little blurb here. The To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science has mobilized a team of the most experienced, connected, and passionately curious minds from the U.S. intelligence community, including the CIA and Department of Defense, that have been operating under the shadows of top secrecy for decades. The team members all share a common thread of frustration and determination to disrupt the status quo, wanting to use their expertise and credibility to bring transformative science and engineering out of the shadows and collaborate with global citizens to apply that knowledge in a way that benefits humanity. Now, on the surface, that sounds really good.
Sure.
But if you watch the little video that they put together, they have a big focus on entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember who in our group said it, but they said, basically you're investing to pay for movies. The movie of Tom DeLonge's books is probably where that money is going to go. And they want you can invest, but you have to invest at least $200.
Yeah, at least that's the minimum. I've also heard that this is supposed to replace MUFON.
I did not
as an
hear
organization. That. I've had some people posting on Facebook that have said that it's supposed to replace MUFON as being like kind of a clearinghouse for people to report.
I can't see that as being a good thing because this is essentially a private company.
Yeah, well, MUFON almost was a private company.
Pretty much is.
Yeah, when Bigelow essentially
has
bought it. Yeah. But
so
now they're but going back to Corey Goode, I mean that's all they want to talk about is Corey Goode and all these other weird, what was it? I was listening to Greg Bishop's interview with one of the guys that was from MUFON, that basically at the Roswell conferences in this year, that he basically threw away his MUFON card because they've just become really entrenched with a lot of more new agey beliefs.
Yeah, for a group that's supposed to be more scientific.
Yeah.
And this is not a replacement because, as I said, this is a private company.
Yeah.
You're investing, they want your investments, the global citizens, basically just means give us your money and you'll be a part of this. But there's no set promises in any of this stuff. It's not like, hey, we're trying to build invest and help us do this. It's just, like I said, that press release was very, very well worded and crafted, and it really doesn't say anything. And anytime you have,
it's kind of like this corporate gobbledygook.
Yeah, it sounds great. It's like, disrupt the status quo.
Yeah.
How exactly? I mean,
what exactly does that mean?
How is this better than what SpaceX is doing?
Mm-hmm.
And SpaceX has been doing it for a long time. These guys haven't, so they're starting from the ground up.
Well, one of the things I've often wondered, you bring that up, that's interesting. We talked about Robert Bigelow just a couple minutes ago and him buying MUFON. I've wondered if some of this stuff with this and Tom DeLong and him buying Bigelow and some of this new kind of interest in UFOs may be just a way to kind of cover up weaponization of space.
Oh, that's very possible. That is very possible.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you have a bunch of CIA, I don't care if they're ex-CIA or say they're ex-CIA, they're still CIA in most cases.
See, it's like, the comparison to Paul Benowitz. I mean, I don't think that DeLong is like mentally deficient.
No.
But he could be another willing dupe in the fact that he's a true believer and that he really thinks that he's getting information out of these guys. Which, as I said before,
I think he does believe it, regardless of what's going on. I have no doubt he fully believes it.
Yeah, he's a true believer in it. What I found interesting, and from what I understand, because what was it, back in February of this year, he was putting that book out with Peter Levenda.
Yeah.
And of course, probably Levenda wrote most of the whole book.
Yeah, very possible.
But Levenda, from reading a few of his books, I can't see that Levenda would have an extraterrestrial viewpoint of this phenomenon.
But
plus some of Tom DeLonge's ideas where he talks about like these being gods and all this kind of stuff more lends itself to the non-ETH.
True. Yeah, it's almost like he's trying to mix the two.
Right.
Because he's talking about, consciousness plays a part. It's like, well, that's an easy thing to key in on now. I mean, we've been talking about that for years.
Yeah,
and now it's starting to hit the more mainstream ufology, and so they just throw that in there. There's the new twist, because that's what everyone's talking about. So now we're going to sound like we're on board with the newest research on this stuff.
Yeah.
The other bit here, there's another clip from this. It says, "To the Stars Academy strives to be a powerful vehicle for change by creating a consortium among science, aerospace, and entertainment that will work collectively to allow gifted researchers the freedom to explore exotic science and technologies with the infrastructure and resources to rapidly transition them to products that can change the world." So products, first of all, means they're looking at
0-point energy, man.
See, I don't.
You're gonna have this little device that gives you 0-point energy, and it's gonna have Tom DeLonge's face on it.
I'm gonna say this is more a money-making scheme.
Yeah.
And not to say that they're intentionally being deceptive about it, because it really does kind of say that in. Like I said, I think the first thing you're going to see out of this group is a movie. Or even a web series, depending on how much money they have to work with. That's the first thing they're going to do.
Well, look what Guy is doing.
Yeah, exactly. It could be something along those lines.
With their, 3-fingered mummy.
Now, that was definitively declared a fraud, right?
I don't know. I think some people have. I mean, it seems that that's probably true.
I thought I had read something that someone examined it.
About it.
I know the Peruvians weren't happy about it, but I thought I saw something that said they had examined it and. And by the way, I was quoted. Those quotes were posted in an article on Mysterious Universe, a good website for this type of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, you and I pulled that up about the same time.
So, and the last thing they say here, Tom DeLong is a guy with interest, inspiration, and imagination, and cash and fame, and that's true. He is, he already has the money. So why the big push for investment? I mean, I guess you never have quite enough money.
Is he gearing? Kind of got my gears thinking. Gears going here. Is he going with the $200 minimum thing? Is he going for people that maybe have more money so that it's a little less grassroots than everybody thinks it should be, like kind of MUFON is or was. So is he trying to get some really big backers to give him not hundreds of dollars but thousands?
Oh, I'm sure. Of
dollars to back this.
But the thing is, like I said, look at some of these other tech companies. Look at Elon Musk. Look at Google. What are these guys going to achieve that those companies can't?
Yeah.
And the big thing they're pushing is that it's that they have these military people behind them. Well, those guys also want to make a buck.
Sure.
I don't know. It's not what I'll say this. It's not what I expected to happen. I expected his announcement to be something really off the wall, and again to just kind of be like, oh yeah, he's being Benewitzed, and.
Well, he said stuff before, like he said, "Well, I've got the big announcement coming," and then it would never happen.
Yeah. And so now his big announcement is he's formed a company and wants you to invest in it, and potentially for a brighter future, I guess.
Well, isn't that kind of similar to what Stephen Greer has been doing?
A little bit.
All along. I mean, hasn't he been? I mean, I made the joke about 0 point energy, but he actually does talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hasn't he been supposedly in contact with the high officials of the government? And I mean, isn't DeLong just kind of stealing?
Maybe I don't
Stephen
follow Greer that closely, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I saw the documentary, the serious with the little.
I saw the serious one, yes.
Alien thing.
And what struck me about Greer is that he's such a good showman.
Right.
He is a good talker. He is a salesman out there. I don't. There are some people where I go, why are people like fawning over this guy? With Greer, I understand it. Greer can really just drive his point home. Greer sounds confident. He's a good salesman. Yeah. And I think he believes at least part of what he's saying, if not all of it, which just adds to that. And when you do get results, I mean, those things in the desert, from what I can tell, really do seem to produce some kind of an effect, which is not surprising. I mean, you put enough intent into something, you're going to
talk about calling down the UFOs.
Yeah. But you never see them call down a spaceship. You get lights.
Right.
And that to me is not surprising, especially if you're in the right area. And some of them are probably planes and stuff like that. And they're willing to accept whatever. You see a light, I've seen a UFO.
Well, I've always found that interesting that here Stephen Greer is, and he's somebody that says that, the aliens contacted me in 1973 or something like that. And he believes in this other culture, this race from outer space is going to come down and give us this new form of energy that's going to get us off dependent of fossil fuels, but yet somehow these people in the desert can command these things to come down and command these supposedly higher intelligent beings. I mean, you got to think to yourself like that that's not what it is. It's not extraterrestrial. It's something else that's going on with these people. And his stuff is almost cult-like in many ways.
Almost. And the thing is, I don't necessarily think he's a bad guy. He founded CSETI, which is the Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Yeah.
And then more recently, the Disclosure Project, trying to get the government, again, to tell us what they know, which, they're going to tell us what they want to tell us. There's no amount of pressure that's going to get the government to tell us something they don't want to tell us.
Well, how long have we heard the whole disclosure thing?
Oh yeah.
It's going to happen this year. It's going to happen.
It's always just about to happen.
It's kind of like these preachers that make these end of the world predictions.
Yeah.
We just went through that back in September, and it's the same thing with the disclosure movement. And then people are saying that I've read some people saying that this Tom DeLonge announcement is the closest thing that we've ever gotten to disclosure.
Yeah, because they announced that, this guy worked for a group that, researched unidentified flying objects within the government. And it's like, well, we know that. I mean, we didn't know who the group was, but it's a safe assumption to make sure that that group exists.
Everybody comes up and would come up to me or come up to some other people and they talk about, the UFO subject, whether there's extraterrestrials or not, whether they really exist.
Mm-hmm.
And they would bring up somebody like Paul Hellyer, he was the former Minister of Defense in Canada.
Okay.
And it's like, that's got to be our Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut.
Right.
Was another one. And that people would always say, well, that's got to be proof that this is real because these guys, they say it's real.
Right.
It's like, no,
right.
they believe it's real.
Yes.
Just because somebody in a high position of power believes it doesn't necessarily make it real. Doesn't make it a reality.
To say it's real, we need evidence.
Yeah.
And unless there's some kind of solid evidence that they can present, and I feel like the government, if they wanted to fake solid evidence, again, with their tech probably being decades ahead, and consider how fast our tech progresses, and then consider they're decades ahead. In 2 decades, look how much stuff is different even in 10 years ago from what we're using now. I mean, smartphones are magic 20, 30 years ago. Like, we could never have imagined the things that a smartphone could do. I mean, even shows like
Agreed.
Star Trek with like the tricorder that could do all this stuff.
We couldn't even imagine this 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, a smartphone blows away the tricorder. I mean, yeah, it's not a medical instrument, but as far as what it can do, it's a universal translator. Yep. You can talk into it in one language and it will talk out in another.
Yep.
You can get maps of anywhere in the world. You could talk to anyone in the world instantly. I mean, it's insane. Where is it going to be 5 years from now? Where is it going to be 10 years from now? And then what does the government already have?
Yeah.
That that it will leak down to us eventually.
I mean, stuff that's used in the military is what they've given the figure. I've heard the figure of 30 years ahead. I mean, it could be less than that, but still. I mean, our space program where we got certain things that we use all the time come from that development.
Yep.
So it's not too hard to imagine that would be true, and that you might have some kind of advanced kind of weaponry or some kind of technology that we just don't know about.
Well, look at these attacks. Where were the attacks? Was it in Cuba?
Cuba.
That to me sounds. I mean, these guys are in their hotel, and suddenly their heads feel like they're going to explode. They get really, really sick, and if they move, it goes away.
Yeah.
That sounds like a some kind of sonic weapon that's very, very specifically delivered.
Make you sick.
Yeah, and the thing is, like people are like, well, the government said it wasn't them. Really? Oh, well then, if the government said it wasn't them, then clearly it wasn't them,
You know what's funny about that story?
What?
Is that they say, well, the Cuban government are doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to saying that we actually have that kind of technology, they'll deny it up and down. But if it's the big bad Cubans,
and it may be a ploy
and
for
that technology is around. I'm certain.
Oh yeah, well we've seen demonstrations of it to some degree.
Stuff
and more than that, I mean they've used sonic stuff as weapons for a while now. And even so when you're seeing this stuff in advertising. They had, I forget what movie it was, but if you walked in a certain direction in front of that poster, you would hear the poster talking to you.
Yeah, that's
the billboard.
Yep.
What movie was it?
Directed audio.
Yeah, but what movie was it that they were doing that with?
I think it's been several.
Really? Okay.
I think there was like a billboard in L.A. that when people would drive past it in the cars, they would hear the audio coming at them.
Okay, I know there was one that if you stood.
I think Paranormal State did something like that.
Did Paranormal State the TV show?
The TV show, yeah. Paranormal State had some. They had like a billboard or something that had that direct audio.
Interesting.
To where you can only hear it unless you're like directly in front of it.
Right.
Or you directly pass it.
So what I'm saying though is like if that's being used in advertising, consider how far ahead the military is.
Well, think about it. If the military had that 20 years ago and they blast that at somebody would think they're just going insane.
Yeah. Or you could get someone to go shoot people.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was walking through DC the other day. I stopped over there and I met these guys that were in this kind of like this little plaza, and they had like several teepees set up, and they called themselves the Free Native American or Free Indian Movement or something like that. I took a picture of it. But they were Native American. I think they were from one was from Ohio, and I think the other one was from Arizona. And I started talking to them, and they started talking about all these kind of like weaponry, like mostly about chemtrails. We're talking about like, you know, those kind of weapons that would make people go crazy, like EMF and those type of things. And there was something about the 5G bringing in the mark of the beast system. I don't know about that, but you know, those are guys that are out there that are convinced about it. And I was telling them about the book that you know, Robert Guffey wrote called Camelio. We had him on like last year.
Everyone tells me to read that, and I have not gotten around to it. I always forget about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically about and I was telling him about it. There's a man that he knows, Robert Guffey knows, he was a friend of his, and he was kind of just he was like a heroin addict and a real big partier. And he invites this kid over to he doesn't invite him, but somebody brings this kid to his party. And he has like this like Department of Defense computer. And then the next thing you know, like the NCIS, the Navy Investigative Service, they enter the house and take everybody off. And they interview the guy at the house of this party, you know, just kind of put him through his interrogation. And eventually they just let him go. He's like, I don't know this kid. I don't know who he is. And then weird stuff starts happening in his apartment where he starts to see like, starts to feel bad, starts to see like kind of like figures skirting around the floor, feeling like there's people in the apartment, looking outside, and there's like a vista of another world in the window. And at one point he actually looks in the mirror, kind of like at the side of the mirror, puts the mirror to the side, and he sees somebody crouched down, like a tiny person crouched down in some kind of weird suit in his house. And he looks back and there's nobody there. Which, I mean, that all sounds just crazy. But Robert Guffey in the book, he goes to, he's actually at his Masonic lodge, and he finds out that he goes to the same Masonic lodge as this guy who actually had a patent for this invisibility technology. And it's like, and the Navy had been interested in his patent and his technology and had been interviewing him, sending people to look at it. And it's just basically like, you know, it's just, what is that, refraction, where it just reflects the area where the person is. You can't really
around
see it.
Yeah, so like invisibility. Yeah,
so it just kind of blends in like camouflage. And the Navy had apparently and then here's the Navy apparently using something similar on his friend. So crazy stuff like that happens all the time. I mean, I have no doubt that stuff is real.
Yeah. And I mean, we know EM has a huge influence on people too,
Right.
And that stuff's all over the atmosphere now. I mean, with our tech, it just, you know, keeps putting this stuff out. I just got a message from someone. Let's see if I can find this message on here. Not showing up on here. So someone listening currently at the moment had some comments. They're listening from Canada. I don't know if I got a name.
Is this
here.
real time here?
Yeah, since we're live, I can take some questions here. Yeah, they didn't leave their name, but it said Jason Colavito, I guess, put a blog up about Tom DeLong, and the title is "Tom DeLong is seeking your investment in To the Stars to give himself a $700,000 or more payday." And they said, the person who sent this to me said, so basically DeLong is giving himself a minimum $100,000 annual income just for the use of his music and image. As I read it, he would then be entitled to even more money as president and CEO of the company, and possibly still more money for the original TTS AAS products he develops as part of its regular operations, i.e. the movies. That part isn't spelled out in the document, so I have no idea what salary DeLong will pull in or how he will be paid for the materials he, quote, writes and produces for the company outside of his own production house. Given the payments are supposed to last for at least 7 years, don't expect disclosure anytime soon.
Wow.
And that's Jason
There you
Colavito, who is a professional skeptic.
Right.
But it makes some very good points, obviously. And they said here from the K, the username is K9 is cute, who sent this to us. From the same blog post, what is utterly astonishing is that DeLong is using disclosure to sell T-shirts and CDs, and this in turn seems designed to create demand for TTS AAS stock. The money taken in through the stock offering, $1 million or more, is already earmarked to the tune of $700,000 minimum to DeLong himself. In short, what this is what TTS AAS is all about: big cash payments in a for-profit entertainment company. This is hardly non-profit, selflessly produced truth. Disclosure is simply a product being sold for profit.
Yeah.
And
I was going to add too about this kind of non-ETH tinge that he has to his whole Secret Machines project, and now this To the Stars Academy. Whether or not that's an even more appeal to the young, because maybe, aliens just aren't as cool anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe the people are looking into other avenues. So he's kind of like, by having someone like Peter Lavinda or Jacques Vallée, I think maybe wrote one of the introduction to the book. So maybe having them is it's more of a hip thing that's now.
I think Vallée distanced himself from him, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe he did. Did he write the foreword to the book?
I don't remember. He did something, and then I think he seemed to have distanced himself.
Yeah.
And the thing about Lavinda is also, I believe, the author of the Avon version of the Necronomicon, the Simon Necronomicon.
So I've heard.
And that is, of course, a fake book being pushed off as the real Necronomicon.
Oh, yeah. It's completely fake.
To say, I'm not sure what I think of Lavinda. Like, I don't have a huge problem with him doing that, because honestly, if you know anything about this stuff and you pick that book up, it's very obviously not real. Mm-hmm. And as a piece of entertainment, it's fine. And of course I had weird things happen to me when I was reading it. That always bugged me, because I know it's not real, but yet I had all like the...
It's kind of like Slender Man.
Yeah, like the invisible thing on the cliff top happened right when I was reading the Necronomicon. And one of the notes I made in my journal when that happened is, I've also been reading the Necronomicon. I can't imagine this is related, but I feel like I should note it.
Whether it's Peter Lavinda or whoever it was that made it up, still based it in real.
It's based on some Sumerian mythology. Yeah. We got another comment here. For Adam Sain, Gerald Ford and Reagan came very close to being assassinated. Those attempts are almost forgotten by the general population.
Yep.
To your knowledge, does the conspiracy community have theories about them? And that comes from James Leroy Wilson.
Well, Gerald Ford, one of the women you had 2 assassination attempts on him. One of the women, I forget her name, she had just randomly decided to fire at him while he was visiting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. Could there be a mind control aspect of that? Yeah. I don't know.
Personally, with Reagan, I feel like they were trying to get him out of the way so Bush could be president.
Yeah. Well, the second one with Ford, I think I can't remember the order, but Squeaky Fromm was the other one, right? And she was a member of the Manson family.
That's right.
She was one of those diehard Manson family members. And, there's all kinds of weirdness with that.
Yeah.
There was, so there's some people that think that the Manson family had some tie in to the CIA or some kind of mind control cult. That's, take that for what it's worth. So that could be it.
Yeah.
It's interesting though that they were trying to get rid of Gerald Ford when he didn't seem like the kind of president that would. And actually, Reagan tried to replace him in 1976, right?
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he tried to become the nominee, but because Ford was kind of like this caretaker president, but Reagan is even more interesting because John Hinckley, honestly, who they released last year, right? Hinckley's brother was having lunch with one of the Bush brothers. Can't remember which one off the top of my head when this happened. Because apparently the Hinckley family and the Bush family were really good friends.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
And like you said, there is the thought that they pushed during to get rid of Reagan so they could get Bush in there 8 years early.
Well, they wanted him in. They wanted him as the nominee, but they realized he wasn't going to win, so they pushed Reagan because Reagan had the charisma and the personality,
right.
and apparently he did not want Bush. From what I understand, he did not want Bush as his vice president.
He didn't.
He was very much against secret societies and all this other stuff, and he made an announcement that he wouldn't take him because he was going to expose all these secret societies if elected president. And then suddenly one day he announced Bush was his vice president, and he stopped talking about secret societies, as if that was any more cookie cutter, suspicious.
Yeah, there was this thought. There's a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Was a guy's name, Larry Abraham, that wrote it. There was a thought when Reagan was coming up, because in some of the conspiracy theories, like the real serious John Birchers, they thought that Reagan was going to end their influence of like the Trilateral Commission or the Council of Foreign Relations and all these different think tanks. And he didn't. And there's kind of similar, not to delve too much into politics here, Seriah, but there's kind of similar thoughts that Trump was going to do the same thing. But the other thing about John Hinckley was the whole Catcher in the Rye thing. That whole mythos.
Okay. All right.
Because Mark David Chapman, the guy who shot John Lennon, also had the Catcher in the Rye on him. And so
that's right.
Hinckley supposedly emulated, what they tell you is Hinckley emulated Mark David Chapman. And of course, he got the whole idea apparently from Taxi Driver because he was in love with Jodie Foster, blah, blah,
right,
blah,
right,
blah.
Yeah.
And Jodie Foster was in Taxi Driver. And so there's that thought that the Catcher in the Rye book was served as some kind of trigger to cause these guys
now I
to
remember
do
this
what
stuff.
they did. Yeah. So, there is some interesting scuttlebutt, I think, with the Reagan assassination. But then he lived.
And I would highly recommend Russ Baker's, what is it called? The Bush Family Jewels or something like that. Look up Russ Baker's whowhatwhy.com.
I know what you're talking about.
It's a fantastic book illustrating just how much influence and he footnotes everything. It's not like wild conspiracy theory. He footnotes everything going all the way back to their grandfather in the World War II, Prescott Bush. All the way to current day, just how much of a connection and influence they have been. He said he wrote it because he heard, I always forget which one's which, but Bush, who was president in the 80s.
George H.W.
Yeah, and he said, someone asked him where he was when JFK was assassinated, and he said he didn't know.
Yeah, well, Nixon said the same thing.
Really?
Yeah, he said he didn't remember where he was.
And so Russ Baker said that's weird. This is a guy who was involved in the CIA at the time, and he doesn't know where he was when the president was shot.
Yeah.
And it turns out he was giving a speech in a nearby town. And not only that, but he was in Dallas that morning.
Yeah, Nixon was also in Dallas.
Okay. All right. And then, he called in a hint or something, some kind of info to, whatever line, trying to place himself at a completely different place. At the time, it's really complicated when you look through us. Like I said, it's all footnoted, it's all factual evidence. You look at it, it's like, this just looks sketchy as hell. What's going on here? He doesn't say, "Oh, he was involved in some way." He's like, well, "Here's the evidence. You make up your mind what's going on."
Well, there's been all kinds of thoughts about that. That the first Bush 41, was because he was in the Ford administration. He was the I think in the late Nixon administration, he was the head of the CIA.
Yes.
And supposedly he was never had any ties to the CIA before then. But that's the big debate. Whether he was part of the CIA or before he was actually the head of it or not.
Yeah.
And there's, the whole Prescott Bush thing and being kind of a facilitator, like a middleman between basically big banking interests and the Harriman Brothers Bank and the Nazis. That's interesting stuff too.
Yep. I want to get into the pyramid thing in a minute too. We have a little under a half an hour left. But K9 is cute sent another message, and you can say, if you want to throw in some last minute questions or comments, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the little pop-up, and I'll get them while we're talking here. That's only if you're listening to the live show on WVBR on Saturday night.
Didn't we talk about the band Caninus earlier today?
Yes, we did.
Grindcore band
with a dog singer. But they said my friend Doug, who should get the credit for finding all this material from skeptical sources, also pointed out another skeptical blog that pointed out how there is nothing new going on so far as the DeLong situation goes. It's the Bad UFOs site, and it says, is the presence of government insiders in a UFO organization unprecedented? Does it promise significant informational breakthroughs? Most ufologists today may not be aware that back in the 1950s and 60s, NICAP had several former high-ranking CIA officials in its leadership. In 1957, Roscoe Hillenkoetter, or something like that, the first director of Central Intelligence from 47 to 50, became a member of the board of NICAP.
Yep.
Also in 1957, Colonel Joseph Bryan III, the founder and head of the psychological warfare staff at the CIA, became a member of NICAP, of the NICAP board. Several other CIA officials also became affiliated with NICAP. Nonetheless, despite all these government insiders, NICAP never obtained or revealed any supposed UFO secrets held by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Nor is this the first time that those with a background in science and technology have been brought together in a UFO research organization. In 1973, with much fanfare, former Air Force Blue Book consultant Dr. J. Allen Hynek announced the formation of the Center for UFO Studies. Despite the participation of numerous scientists who were previously part of Hynek's Invisible College, CUFOS ultimately changed nothing in the UFO controversy. And that, like I said, that comes from badufos.blogspot.ca.
And neither has a MUFON either.
Yeah.
They haven't changed anything.
So this DeLong thing, and just in the time we've been talking about it, looks more and more like a money grab. It really does.
Yeah.
And you'll get a movie out of it.
And it could also be what we were talking about before, just a disinformation campaign as well.
We could get another Battlefield Earth out of this.
Oh, we could, yeah. I think the UFO, this is really cynical and skeptical of me, but I think the whole UFO mythos serves a purpose. I think it serves a purpose of covering up what our own military and now our own private industry are doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They totally use the UFO field to obscure that. It was a UFO. Yeah, okay, except it wasn't,
whether it's real or whether it's a real phenomenon or not. What was the one there was a lady, I think her last name was Keen. I think you guys posted it on our Slack page.
I don't remember. But
she had said something about this is going to, we're going to prove UFOs are real. That's undoubted. It's undoubtedly real.
Yeah.
It's like, well, duh. Yeah.
Yes. There's a phenomenon
that.
First of all, there's always going to be unidentified flying objects if you take the term at face value.
Yep.
Secondly, there is definitely a phenomena that involves lights in the sky and possible things that look like crafts.
Mm-hmm.
This part I don't have a problem with. It's like when people go through, so much trouble to prove that there could be ghosts. It's like, ghostly apparitions exist. Ghostly phenomena happen. It doesn't tell me anything about what they are. And this is kind of what we got to cut through. That's the noise we got to cut through. It's like, oh, look at this evidence. Yes, you have evidence of something that people have talked about for all of history. You got a good picture. Great. What is it, though? Is it a thought form? Is it some weird mist that just happened to form, when you took the picture? Is it a dead person? Is it some other kind of spirit? I mean, who knows? Did you affect the film in some way? mentally without realizing you were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there's so much there.
Right.
But I also wanted to get into this announcement that the pyramid, the creation of the Great Pyramid, had been solved.
Well, thank God. I was getting worried.
And did you read this article? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so they found a papyrus or papyri, whatever it's called, that talks about the construction of the Great Pyramid and how they used barges and locks to move 2-ton stones from the quarry up to the base of the pyramid.
Okay.
Now, I had Stephen Meyer on a few years ago, who has a whole theory about how they could have used locks and barges and all this stuff to build the entire pyramid. But that's not what this document talks about. It just talks about these 2-ton blocks they moved down the Nile, and they use water basically to bring them up to the thing. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense.
Yep.
Doesn't tell us how they built the pyramid, because how did they move those blocks in such precision? How did they move the, I forget what they are, 15-ton blocks, I think?
Yeah.
20-ton blocks that make up like
huge.
the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber. They're sitting in the middle of the pyramid.
Uh-huh.
They're not, the smaller stones. Graham Hancock had made the observation because initially he was going back and forth on when it was built. And then he said, no, I think the Egyptology timeline is probably right. He said, but I think the layout was made a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then he said, I think...
The 10,500 year thing.
Yeah, because
right.
that's what it's aligned to. And he said, and I think there may have been 2 construction periods. One, where they put the big blocks in place.
Yeah,
and
the
then,
megaliths. Yeah.
And it never got finished. And then a long time later, they came along without that knowledge of how to move those big blocks, and they put the smaller blocks in place to finish off the structure. And he said there's a very distinct difference between the 2 layers of the pyramid, where you can see one is newer than the other one.
Yeah, I mean, that's not unusual in construction.
No.
If you think about it.
Well, but it could be a century in between. Who knows?
Well, like I said, I was in D.C. earlier in the Washington Monument. If you look at it, there's a part of the Washington Monument that is a different color than the rest of it.
Oh, sure.
Because first of all, they took them from 2 different quarries. And second of all, they stopped building the Washington Monument at a certain point. Because of the war or Civil War or whatever it was.
That's right.
And then after that was over, they started building it up again.
Yep. Okay. I forgot about that.
So who knows exactly what could have happened to interrupt that progression. Maybe they stopped. War, famine, plague. I mean, who knows? And then they started back up again.
And it's one of those things where it's one of those grand mysteries. Who built the pyramids? Well, yeah. I'm guessing Egypt's citizens in some way built the pyramids. Now, whether that was a long time back or, like we said, in 2 different settings or whatever, but for the news article to come out and say that the building of the pyramid has been solved because they knew how 2-ton blocks were now moved in a very reasonable manner. I mean, I don't think that took many people by surprise. It shouldn't have. I mean, that they were using barges down the Nile to move these 2-ton blocks. Mm-hmm. I mean, 2 tons is a lot, but I mean, that's the weight of like my car.
Well, isn't he just kind of proving that, they got them from the quarry to the site and not necessarily how exactly they really
because
built the thing?
Those are built without any kind of anything to hold them in place.
Yeah.
I mean, they are aligned so perfectly. It's ridiculous. And we really can't do it today.
No, we can't.
As I said, Stephen Meyer, if you go back and listen to his show, and he's posted some videos to the Where Did the Road Go group, because now everyone wants to talk to him because, oh my God, water locks. This is the water lock guy. His idea is solid. Mm-hmm. Like the way he talks about how they could build the pyramids, it's completely solid. The problem is it lacks proof.
Yeah.
We don't have the construction remains anywhere. But at least now we have a piece that suggests he could be at least partially right. We have something to support his whole thing. It's one piece in the puzzle, but it doesn't explain how the pyramids were built. It doesn't explain how those huge blocks were built.
Well, you know what that is? It's just one of those get you headlines. It's just going to grab you.
Sort of,
and
but
people don't read it and they're like, "Oh, I know how the pyramids were built."
But I think it's also dismissive. Okay, mystery solved.
It is that as well.
Don't anyone tells you differently, here it goes. This was simple, mystery solved. There was a special, and I had written a blog post before I was ever doing Where Did the Road Go. There was a show on like Discovery or National Geographic, one of those, History Channel, I don't remember what it was called. I still have the blog post somewhere, but it's not up anymore. And they were dealing with the Olmec civilization in Central America and South America. The big heads. Yeah. And they said, well, we're trying to figure out how they moved these big heads to the locations. And so they, some of those heads weigh many, many tons. They're very big blocks. And they said, well, we really can't move one of the really big ones, so we're going to take like a half a ton block or a quarter ton block, whatever it was. And we're going to see if we can move that using the resources that are available naturally. And so they took it and they dragged it to the, to a nearby canal, and they built a boat using all the things, and they struggled to get the thing on the boat, and they floated it down, and they got it to, near where one of these things was, and pulled it off the boat, and they turned around and said, well, we've now solved the mystery. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you didn't solve it because you don't know that that's how they would have done it. At most, you've created a possibility that this is how they did it, unless you can find proof showing that that is how they did it. And B, you had a 500 or 1 ton, or a half a ton block, or some of those are like 20 tons, 30 tons. There's a limit to how big your barge can be without sinking. So now maybe they had a technique where they could make a smaller boat and stick a 30 ton, block onto it and get it down, the canal that we haven't come up with. Something so simple that we'd kick ourselves and go, why didn't we think of that earlier? But it's that thing where they just come out and say, solved. That's not solved. At most,
they don't want you to think about it anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's
don't
like
bother yourself.
They sort of want to disenchant things. It's like, oh, this is really interesting. No, it's not. We solved it. Don't worry about it. No, you didn't solve anything. And if you're just casually listening, you're thinking, oh, okay. But you think, no. Proof. There's no proof here. You proved there's a way to do it. It's like James Randi with, what's his name? What was the guy he always went after?
Uri Geller?
Uri Geller, yes. And he would, replicate what Uri Geller was doing with sleight of hand and be like, there, I've proved he was using sleight of hand. And it's like, no, you proved there's a possibility he's using sleight of hand. But unless, like he did the thing with the seeds where Geller would put the seeds in his hand. He would have a whole bunch of ungerminated seeds. He'd put them in his hand and he'd concentrate and he'd open his hand and a couple of them would have germinated. And, the amazing Randy does the same thing, except he hid the germinated seeds under the ungerminated ones and then just moved them around. He's like, simple, easy. And I'm like, okay, but unless you walk over to Geller before he concentrates on it and mix those up and show us the germinated seeds, you haven't proved it.
Yeah.
You have just proved there is a way to do it that involves sleight of hand that is different from proof. And of course, I'm guessing Geller, I would assume Geller was probably doing it that way. When you're doing an on-demand psychic show like that, you're probably faking most of it.
Yeah.
It's funny because that's kind of, everyone listening to this probably realizes I'm a big wrestling fan, and that's kind of how wrestling came to be what it was, is that it was real back in the day.
Yeah.
And it just got so boring. It's like, because these guys were too good. I think that if you look it up, the last real wrestling match that was a contest lasted like a day. And there were 3 holds and everyone left and the promoters were like, we got to do something. And unlike UFC, which couldn't have the same solutions, the same thing started happening to UFC where these guys were too good and they would just hold each other on the mat. UFC made up all these rules. Oh, you can't have this hold last too long or whatever. And they did it to kind of keep the action going. With wrestling, they said, well, why don't we just fake it?
Yeah.
And you see the same type of stuff with, I think, psychic phenomena, because if you go out there and you flub, everyone's going to remember that. So instead of doing a real psychic trick, it's much easier to, even if you have some kind of psychic ability, it is easier to do a sleight of hand trick and not worry about it, because now it's going to work. You're not going to fail.
Right. I think the thing is that casts doubt on what they're claiming.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And it makes them seem like they're just out for it, for the money
and
or
they
the fame.
And a lot of times,
Yeah. But I definitely see what you're saying. It's like just it's doesn't necessarily prove that person is doing it. It just proves that well, James Randi is doing it.
Right. It proves it's a possibility.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between proving a possibility and proving a fact.
Yep.
So, and that's the type of thing that drives me crazy. It's like, James Randi is probably right. He probably was using sleight of hand, but he didn't prove it. And, don't say you proved it, because you're lying if you say you proved it. And that's the same with a lot of conspiracies. We were talking earlier off the air about 9/11.
Yeah.
There was a National Geographic special that was trying to dispel all the conspiracies. And, so one of the things that people will say is that thermite burned through the beams of the Twin Towers. So National Geographic took a bunch of thermite, stuck it to one of those similar type beams, set it off, it blew away from the beam, and they said, see, impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an engineer, and he said, they didn't really try. So he made thermate, and thermate is very similar to thermite, but it can be made with normal household items. And he replicated what they did, got the same result. And then he started playing with it, trying to control where the explosion would go. And within like 6 tries, he had that thermate burning right through the beam, the exact way that they looked in the Twin Towers. And, people are like, he's just proved that that's what happened. I'm like, no. But he proved it's possible. He proved that is a possibility. He did not prove that's what happened on 9/11. And there is a big difference there.
Yeah, there is. There's also, I've had people have sent me stuff online and just saying, that this guy in his garage proved that the thermate didn't happen. The thing is, though, when you look at something that is such a varied subject as 9/11, and really not going to get into that, but if you look at something that's such a varied subject as that, the truth is there's other aspects of that whole event that you can look at to say, like, I really don't need the tower falling by the thermate. It doesn't, it's not gonna. I'm not going to just sit there and say, oh, well, I guess it didn't happen. I guess the conspiracy, the whole thing isn't viable now.
Right.
Because it's such a multifaceted event that you cannot just use one thing to completely disprove it.
And I think the fact that this stuff works so well on people is why we need to kind of emphasize, like, people really need to think critically about these claims. And it's like when they say, I'm going to upset Bombastic Bill, who's one of our loyal listeners, and eventually I'm going to have him on to debate some of this stuff with me. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. But we'll say, new black hole discovered, and it's like, and it presents it online in the news articles as fact. Yeah. We've discovered a black hole.
Or the alien megastructure.
Yeah, well, that wasn't presented as much as fact, but I mean, that was more of a gotcha headline. I'm talking like, in the science section, it'll say, supermassive black hole discovered. And then you look, and by discovered, they mean they found some powerful X-rays and gamma rays. And if you understand how this works, is they initially didn't know what those were from, and then eventually said it must be from a black hole. That's the only thing we can think of that would fit this scenario. But that's not proving that there's a black hole there. That's a guess. At best, I mean, and Ren, our other roundtable, our newest roundtable person was on when he was on your show, which was a fantastic conversation with him.
Thank you.
He had said something like, we know there's a black hole at the center of the galaxy, and I said, no, we don't. We have a theory, and the theory may very well be right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not a fact, And the argument would be, well, you can't see black holes, but you should be able to see the event horizon. You should be able to see stuff getting sucked into it, even if you can't see the hole itself. You should see nothing, and then something, things getting pulled into it. And maybe at some point we will have that, and we can say, okay, here's a black hole. But what we have now are generally X-rays and gamma rays. The electric universe people, they have an alternate explanation for those X-rays and gamma rays, and actually predicted these things would be found.
Here's something for you.
Yeah.
I think this is along the lines. I was waiting to kind of bring this up. Yeah, I was in D.C. I was at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. I'm in the mammals exhibit, which is just mostly taxidermed animals. But there's this film that everybody was watching, and it was basically about evolution and natural selection. And it was talking about the polar bears, and it was talking about how did the polar bears become white? And it said that, well, over time, a group of brown bears got stuck in the Arctic Circle when the climate changed. And over time, the ones that had a little bit of white fur lived, and the ones that had the brown fur died, and the white fur got selected till eventually they were just completely white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, that's in so many ways almost like a weak argument to make, because how can you the whole natural selection argument, although there may be something to it, it's still just kind of a theory. Like, I don't doubt evolution. I just doubt natural selection.
I think it's more complicated than what they're presenting it as now.
I think that we don't understand a lot about DNA and what DNA can do, and what the mechanism could be. Because you would think after a while, just all the bears would just die if they were just left out in the damn cold.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that there's, just like we were saying, they just want you to accept this idea and just move on and don't really
and it may be right,
exactly
but where's the evidence that that's what happened?
Exactly.
That's the theory. This is a way we can explain it with natural selection, and it may very well have happened that way, but you can't prove it, so don't present it as fact.
Right. Right. It is an assumption, after all, that we think this is how polar bears came about.
The and the thing about the whole natural selection thing, the survival of the fittest, people seem to think that it's the strongest that survive, but it's actually the weakest that die off. It's not the same thing. Yeah. If there's only so much food, it's not only one. If there's 10 creatures and there's only so much food, it's not only the top creature is going to survive. 9 of those creatures are probably going to survive, and the weakest one is probably going to die off.
Right.
Most of the time, unless there's some uncanny luck, and maybe the other ones that was actually better made will die off instead. Disease or whatever. It's not so cut and dry.
Yeah.
And it's not just you're the strongest, you live. You're the weakest. Eventually, you're going to fail.
Yeah, I just question, I just question the use of natural selection as the mechanism for evolutionary change.
Yeah.
I think there's got to be much, much more to it.
So we are out of time.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It goes fast.
That went really fast.
I want to thank everyone who wrote into us. I wish
absolutely.
I had more in-studio guests where we could do this. Maybe you'll come back some point.
Maybe so.
All right. And
we'll get up to Ithaca.
I will say this. I highly enjoy your show, Conspiranormal.
Thank you.
I just listened this week to the Walter Bosley and Ren Collier interviews. Both of them were fantastic. People just need to go check your stuff out. Where do they find it?
There's 2 places to go. You can find our archives at conspiranormal.podomatic.com and www.conspiranormal.com. Conspiranormal is CONSPIRINORMAL.
Okay, and you have some cool stuff. Peter Robbins was going to join us tonight, but everything got kind of mucked up. But you're doing a cool thing with Peter.
Yeah, hopefully in the next day, I'm going to sit down with him. We have our Patreon only feed, and on that, I have an interview with Peter that we did a few months ago, talking about his overland trip to India when he was in his, I think, early to mid 20s, and which is fascinating because you cannot do that now with the state of the world. But back in the 70s, you could do that. And Peter did do it. And apparently we got him right to his entrance into India. So I want to kind of talk about his experiences in India. And he said that he came back through the Soviet Union. So we're going to put that on the Patreon only feed. I'll have I'm going to have this as part of a conspiranormal show, and then I'm hopefully going to talk to Peter about some more, maybe ufological related themes tomorrow as well. So I'm recording this on my little recorder as well.
All right.
So.
And you recorded a little bit at Albatwitch Festival.
Yes. Albatwitch Day.
Albatwitch Day. That's it. I keep calling it fest. It wasn't a fest. It was a day that ended at precisely 4:00. Like it hit 4:00.
Yeah.
And every vendor on the street just went chunk, chunk, packed their stuff up, and they were gone.
They were packing up, and we were told we could go to a dungeon, but apparently.
Yeah, Tim. What happened to the dungeon, Tim?
We did not get to go to a dungeon, which was a little disappointing.
Yeah, well. And then we were told if we were there, if we had asked before 3:00, we could have gone to the dungeon.
Turn the clock back.
Yeah, what time did we get there? We got there at like 2:30 or something.
No, it was around 2.
Okay.
It was a little bit 10 after 2, and we were there till about 4:30.
Yeah, 4:30 or so, which is why we're late here.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this on Dark Matter or on podcast or YouTube or whatever, you have no idea because it's it's on demand. But if you were listening live. We were like 15 minutes late. And then you got lost parking.
I got lost in Ithaca, guys.
But it's been great having you here.
Thank you, Seriah.
And hopefully we'll do it again.
Absolutely. And let me say, too, that, this podcast, Where Did the Road Go, is my favorite podcast.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you.